Well, a warm welcome, especially to Jeff Sachs and to all of you. This conversation has been long in the making because it is very much part of the Berkley Center focus on the culture of encounter, but more broadly on interreligious roles in global affairs. So I'm Katherine Marshall. I'm with the Berkley Center, and today's agenda is a conversation with Jeff Sachs. So let me start by asking Jeff, you have had a lot of different relationships with the Vatican. In fact, I just got your new book. So I have to confess, I haven't read it since I got it when I came back from Abu Dhabi last night.
Oh, wow. Welcome back.
But can you say how you started to get involved with the Vatican and how you see that relationship playing out in your multiple roles?
Well, thank you very much. And our conversation goes back at least 37 years since we've been talking about this, since you were doing such wonderful leadership at the World Bank, and we were working together on the travails of Bolivia. So it's great to be with you now and continuing this long conversation we've had and how much I've learned from you. For me, my time work with the Vatican actually goes back to 1991. Because I was invited at that time to be in an expert group to help advise Pope John Paul II on what would be the encyclical Centesimus Annus. And that was an extraordinarily interesting moment. Centesimus Annus was the encyclical, first the 100th anniversary of Rerum Novarum, which Leo the 13th issued in 1891 about the church's teachings about industrialization. And it was and is considered the breakthrough of the Catholic Church's modern social teaching. So Centesimus Annus was the 100th anniversary of that. But Centesimus Annus also came in the second year of Poland's post-communist revolution in 1991. And I was at the time the main outside economic advisor to the Polish government on the transformation. And Pope John Paul II also wanted to know what's going on in Poland in the economy. And so I had a chance to brief him in a room just off the side of the Sistine Chapel. So that's a pretty memorable life experience. Then I went back to see him in an audience with Bono in 1999 when a group of us went to discuss the debt crisis, and the Pope issued his call for Jubilee year, which in biblical terms was a every 50-year cancellation of debts. And the Pope called for the year 2000 to be a Jubilee year. And Bono and I went back from that meeting, which was at the Castel Gandolfo, to the US Capitol to a hearing of the Banking Committee. And honestly, the Pope's words were so powerful and transformative. It melted the hearts even of some of the most conservative members of Congress who said, this is our moral duty to do this. And it really moved things forward. Then my next active engagement was in 2012, when the Vatican, and especially the Pontifical Academy of Sciences, was starting to prepare for both the 2015 Paris negotiations, the climate issue, and what would become the Sustainable Development Goals. And so I went to speak about sustainable development, and the chancellor of the Pontifical Academy of Science at the time, a friend of both of us, a wonderful, remarkable man, Bishop Marcelo Sanchez Sorondo, was very keen to have the church play a lead role in sustainable development challenges on climate and the environmental crisis and the global development challenges. And so I became more and more deeply involved, almost on a monthly or even weekly basis with Monsignor Marcelo Sanchez Sorondo at that point. The Vatican did wonderful work in analyzing the issues of climate change, and the work culminated in Pope Francis's encyclical Laudato Si, which is a wondrous document. It's science, theology, pastoral guidance, ethics, everything all wrapped up together, plus a strong call for global action. And I really think and know that it moved the negotiating agenda to help close the deal on Paris. And during that year, I worked together with the Bishop Sanchez Sorondo to bring together Pope Francis and UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, because I was the special advisor on the Sustainable Development Goals to Ban Ki-moon. So this was a fantastic joining together of forces, and Pope Francis opened the special session of the General Assembly on September 25th, 2015. That was the moment when the SDGs were adopted. It was an extraordinarily moving and powerful moment. The Pope made a moral call to the world leaders, and the world leaders responded with acclamation, adopting the Sustainable Development Goals. It doesn't get much better than that. I have plenty of pictures in my camera of that very special day at the General Assembly. And since then, I've been involved in a number of projects at the Pontifical Academy of Science and the Pontifical Academy of Social Sciences, including the new book that just came out called Ethics in Action, which was an interreligious dialogue on sustainable development over 3 years with wonderful, wonderful people, Metropolitan Emmanuel of the Orthodox Church, and a very close deputy of His All Holiness Patriarch Bartholomew, and representatives of and scholars of Hinduism, Buddhism, indigenous religions, Jewish faith, Protestant Christianity, the Catholic Church, and we had a wonderful discussion over 3 years on essentially the ways that religious groups and leaders could really help to promote what we want, which is peace and sustainable development, the title of our talk today. And in that context, you and I meet each year also at the annual gathering of Community San Egidio. And so I've gotten very much engaged with the Community San Egidio, as you are as well. I regard it as the greatest fashion show on the planet once a year also, to see everybody in their full, incredible garb. But that's also an interreligious gathering that emphasizes the common call for peace by religious leaders, and again, the religious leaders saying, these wars, they're not on us. We're trying to stop them. Maybe the politicians aren't doing what they need to do, but these are not religious wars. And I take them at their word. I think that that's absolutely correct. Last year, I became an academician of the Pontifical Academy of Social Sciences, and so I regard this as one of the wonderful opportunities to work at the interface of ethics, theology, philosophy, and practical policy, since I continue my work with the UN. And so it's a great merger from my point of view.
How do you see us taking more advantage of these prophetic voices that you're referring to, both within the context of the Catholic Church, which of course has such transnational presence, authority, trust, etc., and the interreligious, which in a way is also something that Pope Francis has focused on very sharply through this notion of the culture of encounter?
I think first, what the Catholic Church has done with the Pontifical Academy of Sciences is absolutely remarkable and wonderful and really important. And that is in preparing Laudato Si, Pope Francis was advised by world-leading climatologists, world-leading experts. And they come to the Vatican. Of course, everybody wants to go to the Vatican, everybody wants to participate, but the Church's philosophy, and I think very strongly so, and really in a way, because the modern Catholic teachings are built on Aquinas, they really are the merger of faith and reason in the best sense. So it really is science and religion, and the work of understanding modern science, cutting edge technologies, challenges like global warming are taken very seriously. So the first thing I have seen is other religions don't have that organized way to gather scientific information. And I've recommended similar kinds of academies to other major religions because I think it's quite important that there is systematic guidance. And I would like to see that kind of work abound because I think the Catholic Church benefits tremendously from it, and therefore the world benefits tremendously from it because the Pope speaks not only with papal authority, but also with the scientific authority because it's backed up by a very rigorous process. What we see often at Community San Egidio is that the religious leaders want to understand more. What should we be doing? What could our communities be doing? Because on a very practical level, they are in touch with billions of people on a regular basis. In fact, they may be more in touch with people in their daily lives than anybody else. But those same communities are suffering droughts, floods, poverty, epidemics, and many, many other problems that require actually first the morality to choose to do the right thing, but then the technical knowledge to be able to do the right thing. And so I think that this notion of empowering the religious leaders to help empower their communities and to help inspire everybody to remember that there's an ethical basis that needs to underpin any of our actions, to my mind, is really what we're about in this. And bringing together the religious and the technical or scientific side is rather key to get the kind of outcomes that I think the religious leaders want and need and could really help to deliver.
Yeah, I think that there is clearly a multiple agenda, many. One of them, of course, is this Hans Küng notion. That he expressed it that there is no peace without peace among religions, and no peace among religions without dialogue among religions. So this interreligious peace has that undercurrent. But there is also what I would call declaration fatigue, statement fatigue, this desire, as you just alluded to move to action. So how do you see some possible next steps on that?
Well, first, I think the advice that the religious leaders can give is really important, and occasionally politicians listen to that advice. I know because I wrote a book about it that Kennedy and Khrushchev were able to find a way towards peace in part because Pope John the 23rd really helped. And Pope John the 23rd, even in his dying days, issued one of the remarkable encyclicals of modern time, Pacem in Terris, Peace on Earth, that was eagerly awaited, by the way, by Nikita Khrushchev, waiting for a hand delivery of the Russian translation of Pacem in Terris directly from an emissary of the Vatican, and similarly in the White House. And so the religious leaders can inspire. And I love Fratelli Tutti, Pope Francis's second encyclical, which is like Laudato Si, a great encyclical, and it is based entirely on, as you say, the ethics of encounter and the basic insight which we don't follow, that if you talk to the other side, you actually could make peace with people you don't even dream you could make peace with. And I've seen this and read about this and learned about this in many contexts, that actually when world leaders meet, it can really make a difference. It seems strange in a way, oh no, there must be more fundamental forces. But, they're human beings. They've got prejudices, ignorance, blind spots. And so when they hear from someone else, oh, that's your concern, they can figure out things that they can't otherwise figure out. I really am unhappy that President Biden and President Putin are not meeting right now. Now, many people say, oh, no, you can't talk to him. You must never talk to the devil and so forth. I don't agree with that approach. And I think that that's really what Pope Francis is also saying. And I always refer to President Kennedy's famous line, let us never negotiate out of fear, but let us never fear to negotiate. That's really saying, let's meet. If we can't agree, we don't agree. But maybe we could find some path forward. And so just the philosophy of encounter, I think, is extraordinarily important. And by the way, even in experimental game theory, if you put people in a room in a prisoner's dilemma context, they may cooperate half the time. But if you let them chat with each other beforehand, even though it's not a binding commitment that they make, they cooperate 90% of the time. So the mere fact of talking, even what experts call cheap talk, because it's not binding you in any way, it's not enforceable talk, makes a huge difference, because the human side is real. Meeting another person, oh, that's not a demon, that's another human being. I might not like them very much, but they have a perspective that I need to hear. And I think that this is really crucial on the peacemaking side, to help find the venues and the mechanisms to meet. I'd like to see Pope Francis play some role in mediating this Ukraine disaster, because I think he could and should. If the belligerent sides, I would hope he could bring the United States, Ukraine, and Russia into some kind of trialogue together, because this is really what we need to end this war. And then on the other side of this equation, because this is a discussion about interreligious participation in peace and development, I would say on the sustainable development agenda, there we have real practical issues, like getting kids in school who are not in school because they're too poor. And the religious communities can play a huge role in that, and take the practical challenge, like Caritas or other groups like Community San Egidio, and really put in place practical programs and use the support of the faithful, and in Islam, the zakat, and charitable giving and so forth, to really put innovative programs in place. Community San Egidio was one of the great pioneers of AIDS treatment. 22 years ago, they started helping poor African communities gain access to antiretroviral medicines before it was, quote, allowed, before there was any international program. But it was out of a religious commitment. He who feeds the least among thee feeds me. It's Matthew 25. It makes a lot of sense. So I think the real practical, on the ground delivery, supported by us in academia, supported by expert suggestions, by contacts with scientific communities on facing a drought or local nutrition or a microgrid or whatever the challenge is, I think religious communities can deliver real services because that's a part of the faith and it's part of the moral commitment.
I think we share that strong conviction. And it's interesting in the Sant'Egidio meeting in October that we both attended recently, it was striking that President Macron of France, perhaps one of the more unlikely leaders to engage with religious communities, was very forceful in calling on religious communities to be part of the dialogue. But I know from my own experience when Jim Wolfenson at the World Bank, when he was the president, wanted to reach out to religious communities, he met almost universal opposition from people in United Nations organizations, in government, in ministries of foreign affairs, but also ministries of health and education. So I think we've come a long way, but how do you see that evolution over what now, in my own experience, is, as you've also highlighted, maybe 3 decades?
Yeah, I think that we need, again, a lot more dialogue so that the different groups can understand what are the issues and challenges and maybe some of the religious issues, but frankly, religious leaders are dealing endlessly with very practical on-the-ground issues, whether it's hungry people or displaced people or other challenges. So there's a lot to talk about and a lot to do. And one of the reasons for that kind of resistance that Jim Wolfenson faced was that the people who were resisting didn't know the other side. And so once you start talking, you say, whoa, we could do some pretty creative things in all of this. And that, I think, is really the key. But Katherine, I think you're doing great work and leadership work, and I want to help you in any way so that we can turn these ideas into real action. I'm working a lot with various UN agencies who have a real on-the-ground mandate, but they don't have the on-the-ground presence the way that a religious parish does. I mean, a parish priest or a bishop or an imam. And so I think the outreach of the kind that we have in San Egidio meetings, but we can think of other ways to do it, could be extremely fruitful, and to identify some areas where we think that this could be most helpful, whether it's getting kids in school or addressing other particular challenges. I'd like to see if there would be interest in which communities might be interested and how we could move things forward. But I think it would be completely in the tradition that you've been leading for so long, and anything I can do to help, I'd love to do so.
Well, that's a wonderful invitation, and I warn you, I will be taking you up on it, as
I
will
know it. And by the
we
way,
in the Berkley Center.
just to let everybody know, in the midst of the Bolivia crisis in 1985, there was really a social crisis. And I called Katherine and I said how bad it is. She said, I know, we're going to move. And she moved an emergency social fund, which I'll never forget. And you did it. So I have no doubt you'll take it up. And please count on me.
Well, thank you for making the time, Jeff, and we'll be in touch.
Wonderful. Thanks to you, and thanks to everybody. Bye-bye.